All right, Jan, are you ready?
I guess so. Yeah.
Here we go. 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. All right, folks, welcome back to the Trauma Therapist Podcast. Very excited to have today as my guest, Jan Ohm. Jan, welcome.
Thank you, Guy. It's really a pleasure to be here.
Appreciate that. Jan's journey with healing began with chronic physical issues that wouldn't resolve by means of modern medicine. Exploring alternatives led her to discover the connection between psychological stress and physiological issues and inspired her to become a psychotherapist. Beginning her practice in 1993, Jan was also the co-director of a Toronto school of Tai Chi Chuan from 1988 to 2018, where she taught hundreds of bodies how to live and move in a harmonious and integrated way. In 2005, Jan began her studies in sensorimotor psychotherapy, which offered her a way to bring the richness of her somatic experience into the therapy space, leading her to her specialty in trauma and dissociative disorders and the creation of WellSpace Trauma Therapy Clinic. Jan, welcome.
Thank you, Guy.
I love how you say you brought bodies and taught bodies.
Mm-hmm.
Look, all right, we'll get into that. Before we do, share with the listeners where you're from originally and where you are currently, and then we'll dive in.
I'm from Toronto originally, and I still reside and live and work here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Simple question, simple
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah. I know.
All right.
One of the few, actually.
Yeah,
Most people in Toronto are from somewhere else, but I'm,
okay.
one of the originals.
So, well, let's dive in.
Mm-hmm.
How the heck did you get here?
How the heck did I get here? Right. Well, obviously I was thinking about that for the biography because how does one, condense several decades of work into a little thumbnail? But it really is true. I was plagued in my actually as a child and right through my 20s with a lot of chronic issues that were making me quite miserable. And it really wasn't until I began my own therapy process that I really got some answers as to why I was so deeply uncomfortable at an emotional and psychological level. And then as those things began to resolve, which they hadn't been, as it mentions in the bio, from lots of, medical and complementary means, things like homeopathy, naturopathic methods, and so on. And it wasn't really until I started to relieve myself of some of the psychological and psycho-emotional burdens that things began to shift for me physically.
So you said when you were, excuse me, you said when you were younger, you had a lot of chronic issues.
Yeah.
It wasn't until you began seeing a therapist that you understood the derivation. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Well, I mean, that's kind of it in a nutshell, because, we're very complex beings and unique beings. And I know that it's a chicken and an egg kind of situation where it comes to medical issues or physiological issues. And we see so much of this in trauma, chronic pain, IBS, you name it. I mean, just about anything can happen with a trauma survivor, and just about anything can pop up in session as well when you're working with a trauma survivor in terms of these, seemingly bizarre physiological manifestations that are arising from the way the body has been holding the memory.
So are you saying you are a trauma survivor?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm
Okay.
a trauma survivor.
Are you saying that there were certain issues or events or experiences that had gone on that had possibly contributed to these physical issues?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. You're kind
Yeah.
of going around,
Does it
dancing
feel
around.
like it?
It
Okay.
does. Yeah.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
I'm not asking you to share
Mhm.
anything you don't want to share, but I'm trying to find out if what were those issues, if they were quote unquote traumatic
Gotcha.
or what.
Yeah.
You don't have to be in
Oh, I
details.
see. Okay. Yeah. No, I don't mean to be going around it.
Okay.
I had, for instance, I had just such a high degree of sensitivity to my environment. And so it was like I had a perpetual histamine response all year round for
Mm,
years. And I had uh, eczema all over my body. So, a lot of these things that are, you know, sort of flushed forward by stress responses were
mm,
just chronic and consistent for me.
mm.
And so that was what I was living with. I never knew when I was going to be overtaken, and I was really in chronic pain and
Wow.
discomfort.
You mentioned the histamine response. Specifically,
Mhm.
what was that? How did that manifest?
Well, I would get incredibly itchy
Mm,
because I had eczema everywhere. That's how it would react. But just, sneezing fits, throat closing over,
wow.
as if I had just been, walked into a barn, for instance, which I have a long time allergy to, lifelong allergy to fur-bearing animals.
And it
And
wasn't
so,
until you saw a therapist who connected the dots. Talk about that.
well, to be honest, my therapist didn't connect the dots. Because I was not oriented to my body so much. It was just a psychodynamic style of therapy that focused a
Mhm.
lot on dreams. And but I just noticed that a lot of the struggles that I was having with my body just began to ease and resolve. And I was just no longer so sensitive.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
everything stabilized health wise.
So how do things unfold from there, such that
Hmm.
yeah.
Well, that experience, that therapy actually led me to, uh, finally admitting aloud to my therapist that I thought, in a very sort of self-deprecating and apologetic way that, uh, as if, who was I to even dream that it might be possible, but you know, maybe I could be a therapist. And he took me very seriously in that moment, for which I was forever grateful. And he
Mhm.
said, "You finally said it. I think we both know that's exactly what you need to be doing with your life."
Wow.
Yeah, so it was one. I get chills telling you about it, actually.
Why do you, Jan,
Yeah.
why did you feel that's what you wanted or needed to do?
Just such a deep interest. And, it was like a mystery. And I was, every issue was a mystery that had to be solved. And I would just enjoy the solving of it and what could be known in the process, what information could be unveiled.
Mhm.
So it was that degree of engagement and inquisitiveness, curiosity that really called me forward. Yeah.
So and how old were you at that
Mhm.
time?
I was around the time of my Saturn return, if you follow these such things.
No.
So okay, so somewhere in around late 20s, bridging 30, around there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So what happens next? You go to school, you pursue this, what?
Yeah, I did a unusual training program, which was more of a mentorship
Hmm.
and supervised practice, involved a sort of culminating research project, and presentation and so on. And, you know, back in those days when psychotherapy was not regulated here, one could do these things and then go into practice. So I did. I went into practice. And, you know, I was also teaching it. One of the reasons it worked for me was because I was teaching pretty much full time. I was teaching Tai Chi Chuan. So I needed to be able to maintain that. I couldn't just, you know, not keep up my business while I was studying. So it made it possible for me to do both.
Very interesting. How did you get into Tai Chi?
Well, it was one of these things that one of the many practitioners that I had seen for my health issues had said, you know, you should do something like Tai Chi. You need to calm down. And so I eventually did. And yeah. Uh,
Interestingly enough, I just learned that, and maybe you can add to this, that Tai Chi has a hand pushing
mhm.
contest. I never knew that. So they
Yeah,
have
push
like
hands.
push hands, like competitions.
Yeah.
Um, really interesting. And for those people
Mhm.
who aren't familiar with Tai Chi, can you just give us a little snippet of what it is?
Sure. Well, it's a mindful movement practice that has its origins in self-defense. And so, but it also has very rich philosophical and also, you know, medical component from the five element theory of Chinese medicine. So it's very layered there, and as we taught it in our school, inside those four aspects. So there
Mm.
was the exercise practice. There was also the philosophy based on, you know, Taoist holism of yin and yang theory, and then there was the medical, some knowledge of that too, for in terms of injury treatment. So, you know, that through the lineage that I studied, it was believed that if one learned to harm, which, you know, the defensive aspect of Tai Chi could do,
Mm-hmm.
one must also learn to heal. So you had to learn how to work with the body through pressure point massage and some basic Chinese herbal first aid, and Tui Na, which is you know, an injury treatment and massage
Wow.
system. So it was quite exhaustive and full in that respect. It's not, you know, it's much more than what people associate as, you know, for old people to
Right.
do in the
In
park
the
sort of
park,
thing.
right.
Yeah.
But I mean,
Yeah.
I could just imagine how
Mhm.
richly this contributed to your work as a therapist and your philosophy as a therapist. But before we
Mhm.
move on, so okay, so you studied, you had this in what sounds like a really interesting mentorship.
Mhm.
Where, at what point, or and how did you begin working on your own trauma during this time, previous to this time, moving on, etc.? Where was that in all of this?
Well, you know, it really, like so many therapists, and perhaps yourself included, it wasn't until I got into level one sensory motor uh, that it was kind of like, oh, you know.
We'll talk about that. Oh, what was that? Oh, for you?
Well, just being able to name and identify some of the stuff that I felt inside my own nervous system. Now, I have to say that, you know, Tai Chi, it was hugely resourceful for me, enormously resourceful. Um, and there's some experiences I had through my Tai Chi practice and development that I also now had words for based on what I was learning from sensory motor. So that it was just, there was a lot of pulling together and dropping in and understanding. And I was so ready to hit the ground running with it because, and this was so long ago, Guy, when nobody, for the most part, including or thinking of including the body in psychotherapy, whereas now it is so common. And all the therapists that we were literally trying to sell the training method to, because my colleague and I literally went door to door to training venues and institutes and hospitals and so on, and spoke to any therapists who wanted to listen. And we would do these little information sessions to try to get enough people to do a training so that there would be enough graduates from level 1 to substantiate a level 2. And I became a training organizer for many, many years to create the hub that Toronto now has become in SP. So for me, my somatic underpinning was highly, highly unusual. And I saw so many therapists who just really were quite very divorced from their own bodies, and for whom it was a really big, brand new journey for them to embark on, getting in touch with their body. And I had that at a very deep level from many, many years of Tai Chi study and practice. So it went hand in hand very beautifully for me. And I as you said earlier, yes, I have pulled enormously from my education and growth and development in martial arts to be able to, offer many resources and so on to my clients from a somatic basis.
You said when you began SP, you had that kind of whoa moment.
Yeah.
I'm curious, while you were doing Tai Chi, and because it's so much of the body, were there ever moments where you felt yourself triggered?
Yeah, actually, when I began teaching, with the eyes on me, it was excruciating. It
When you
was
began
very
teaching what?
excruciating.
Teaching Tai Chi?
When I began teaching Tai Chi, yeah.
So talk a little bit about what eyes on. I'm not sure what that is.
Well, as the instructor, right? You
I
are
see.
leading the class, and so the eyes are on you, and the focus is on you. And I remember just being utterly unable to control the tremors that were coursing through my body, like big tremors.
Wow.
And this kind of stuff, a lot of it became, it was a way to release it. And it was highly uncomfortable on the spot, but I pushed through. It's one thing about all these suffering with all these chronic medical issues, is that I learned how to just push through if there was something I wanted. And so it didn't scare me off. I kept going, and I'm continually amazed the more I learn about many of these methods, like take brain spotting, for instance, that uses the eyes as dipoles to light up different networks of the brain when they're processing with a client. There's a huge component of eye work in Tai Chi Chuan, where you're following the movements and you're following them focally as well as maintaining a peripheral vision at the same time. So, putting together really how much that exercise, if you really study it and perform it at depth, how much it actually does for your whole system in terms of creating, a lot of right brain, left brain integration, and a lot of connectivity in the brain, because it's just activating all those networks. And of course, in the movement itself does that also. And the mindful component while it's being practiced.
Right.
It's funny how we've ended up talking about that so much, but
well, it's obviously so related.
Yes, yes, it is.
When you got into SP, Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, how did your interest in trauma develop and unfold and
Mm.
impact you?
Hmm. Again, I think it's just the complexity of it. Like, working with dissociative, trauma-related dissociation and all the complexity and ways that that can present, and all of uh, all of the stuff that comes your way that you need to learn how to understand and creatively attend to in the moment. That to me was just a way to be right there with my client in a way that felt like me, like home. It was a therapist that I could be for people. And it gave me a way to do that. And, it is, there's a lot of complexity in the field, as you know, in that particular area. And again, I think it's just the part of me that likes a mystery and likes to solve it,
Mm-hmm.
um, that sort of took to that end of things. And then also, I know you're fond of asking these questions, so I'll just go there. I had an early experience before I knew anything about trauma, where I was working with a client, and she had a traumatic experience in her past, and I asked her to relive it, and it was horrible, you
Mm-hmm.
know, and because I didn't know better at the time. But I was very affected, as we are as therapists, I think, very affected by the mistakes that we make, and the clients for whom we can't find that doorway.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the ones that stay with me. I always think about what could I have done differently. In any case, that was so shocking to me. So learning about how to work with trauma safely just felt hugely important, as it is, because you don't have to scratch the surface very deep of most folks that we meet,
Mm-hmm.
without finding that they have lived through some trauma.
When you got into SP, was it with the understanding that this was that trauma was kind of at the forefront of the work in a sense?
Uh, you know, Good question. I'm a dive-in sort of person, and when the moment I think that's something that's happened for me in my life, is that when that moment's presented itself, even if I didn't see it coming, I knew it when it was there, and I dove in, and SP is just something I dove into, and
Right.
then it revealed itself over time, and no regrets on that.
Right, right, right.
Hmm.
The I think for me, the subject of trauma is certainly one thing. Studying about it is one thing. Experiencing it obviously is a different thing. Working with someone is another thing. When you first started working with clients who had been traumatized, how did you deal with that? How was that for you personally?
Um,
For
uh,
example, had you
yeah,
done enough of your own work to be able to
yeah,
manage that and work through that?
yeah. I would say that for the most part, yes. Now, we all, you know, it's when you put your foot on a mine that you realize the mine is there, right? It's from Taoist philosophy, it's from disharmony that we learn of harmony. So certainly, you know, I'm not saying that I didn't run up against my own dysregulations, certainly. And my understanding of that is really deepened over time as well, because there are layers and layers and layers and more layers.
Hmm.
And still much more that we can't bring into our awareness just yet. So it's a process, but I really feel as though that underpinning and somatic development stood me in such good stead in that
Mm-hmm.
regard.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I
Well,
had a lot of grounding techniques under my belt for myself, right? I had a lot of self-regulatory techniques,
right.
and it had facilitated a lot of processing for me as well. Now, not as well as actually going through the training, because that's like terrific therapy if you really let yourself be present to it.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I should also qualify that my trauma was not to the degree that I was unable to contain when I needed to, uh, or titrate, or bring what would allow me to be functional inside of training. And that's not the case for everybody. It's
Mm-hmm.
so it's, if there are degrees of trauma, which I mean, there kind of are,
Right. Right.
I guess mine wasn't that bad,
Mm-hmm.
no.
Mm-hmm.
And after hearing so many people's stories, I can definitely attest to nowhere near the folks that I'm working with in terms of what they endured.
At what point did you decide to, create WellSpace? How did that come about?
Right. Um, Well, that came actually while I was in training and with, working with a whole host of other dedicated practitioners, and just feeling like I'd always been in private practice, and recognizing my own greater need for community and also for support,
Mm-hmm.
uh, as a trauma therapist, to be in a day-to-day proximity to that support, was something that I was really beginning to crave. So in some respects, it came out of that. And then I also wanted to just offer uh, something that could be comprehensive, for someone recovering from trauma, so they could get um, what they needed from different directions to help fast forward the healing for them. And neurotherapy was, uh, for me, was very, very important in order to offer them, to be able to go as far as they could in a shorter period of time.
You said
Because we all know it can,
neurotherapy.
yeah. Mhm.
Neurotherapy is
So
what?
the inclusive of neurofeedback,
Okay.
neurostimulation. So I incorporate a lot of that into my client work, and that's uh, enormously interesting and of value in its own vast area of study, which I'm, really quite new at.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but it's amazing. It's
Mm-hmm.
amazing how that can move things along.
So,
Yeah.
people listening to this, Jan,
Mhm.
let me just remind everyone I'm speaking with Jan Ohm. She can be reached at wellspace.ca. I'll have that linked up here on the show notes page at the traumatherapistpodcast.com. So, people listening to this,
Mhm.
obviously, therapists of different levels and varying degrees, coaches, etc., survivors, someone just getting into this field, maybe there's a therapist who wants to really start learning more about trauma. What do you say to them? What do you suggest to them?
Wow, what a great question. Well, it's so interesting because, since the pandemic, I just cannot believe how much is available now in terms of somatic study, inclusion of the body in therapy, and trauma informed. It seems a necessity now for, uh, not that it wasn't always, but it's known now that anyone who's doing any mental health work needs to be even physical health work for that matter, ought to be trauma informed. So it's a whole lot easier to get right now. And I find, because I do consultation as well. And I find that a lot of the therapists are coming in with that understanding of polyvagal theory already, and the body. So it's so different from the way it was. It feels like that movement has happened, and we're on the back end of it now. But I still really believe in what the Sensorimotor Psychotherapy Institute has to offer. And I think the level one, I do urge people to do level one of sensorimotor, because it is so comprehensive.
So
And
go ahead. I'm sorry.
yeah, no, that's
okay.
I said no.
So you've been doing this for a while. What do you feel makes you an effective therapist at working with trauma? And I should say, working with people who've experienced trauma.
Right. Yeah. That's a great question. I think, because I have these different perspectives through which to see the human that is sitting before me. And I really do study them, and I hope this doesn't sound, sort of too clinically detached, because it's not, but the organism that they are. And that organism meeting the organism of myself, my own person, and how we are able to find connection. I think that's our therapeutic task in any given moment with a client. And the more hours and time that we do that, and in the more different ways that we do it, I think the more innate it becomes, and the deeper we can sit in that place of connectivity and hold that for the client when they may not be able to hold that for themselves at all, or they may never even have had an experience of real connection before. Or the idea of safe connection is something they can't understand.
Right.
So the way that you meet that type of client who's never known safe connection and can't even comprehend it is going to be very different from someone who is seeking connection for a sense of safety. And so it's traversing that distance in any given moment that is the fun and creative part, and it's a wild ride sometimes too, as we know. But I'm down for it.
Well put. Jan, what's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Jan at wellspace.ca. Yeah.
Jan at wellspace.ca. Okay. Yeah. Let me just make sure I have that here on the show notes. Awesome. Jan, thank you so much for taking the time to be here. Looking forward to getting this out there. You're welcome.
Absolute pleasure.
All right. Take care.
Thank you for doing what you do.
Appreciate that. Take care.